In this video, I'm going to go through some of the basic baits for bass fishing, and I'm going to start off with the plastic worm. The plastic worm can be found in a variety of styles, such as this is supposed to look like a caterpillar, and this most common type is it has a little twister tail on it, and it spins and twists through the water. Then there's your straight-tailed worm, such as this, and it's made to wiggle through the water. And then there's this, it's actually a trailer, but it could be used as a jigging worm too. And it's, to me, it's similar to a straight tail, except it is split at the end. So, and those are your basic worms. And what you want to do with these is you want to either use a jig head, or you can rig it Texas style like that. And it's weedless. I got the barb poked through, but you don't have to. And you'll put a weight or a jig head on here, and you'll cast it out into the spot you want to go to, and you'll let it sink. And when it gets near the bottom, or when it touches the bottom, you just lightly pull up your pole, and it'll float this thing up a little bit, and it'll flip over and go back down and twist, and the bass will usually strike as it's falling down. Now, pretty much the same thing with these worms, except sometimes these you have to twitch them a little bit harder and a little bit more often to get them to kind of wiggle a little bit more. But pretty much either way, just jig them very similar. And these are probably the most basic baits, and they're really good for beginners. But even a lot of experts will use these because they catch a lot of fish. And personally, these are one of my favorite baits. So on to the next bait. The next choice is a spinnerbait or a buzzbait. And these are actually very similar, but they work a little bit differently. I'll start with the buzzbait. It has a little propeller type spinner on it, and you want to use this without any weight. And what you do is you just reel it in at the speed you prefer, as long as it keeps up on high water. And this will meet at the edge of the water and spin and make a trickling noise in the water. And it tends to irritate the fish, or it can attract them, whichever one. And they come up and they strike at the skirt on it. Now these little silicone fibers on here, that's the skirt. And that's usually what they strike on, and that's where the hook is. And the spinnerbait works very similar, except this one's a lot larger. But you don't run it top water. You keep it down. Well, you could really run it as deep as you want, but this one you could jig a little bit if you choose to. You can either just give it a nice slow retrieve, or you could jig it up and down on banks and stuff. And these spinners here, there's a gold one and a silver one. Obviously they're not real gold or real silver. They shine and reflect light, and that makes the fish think that it's a bait fish, such as a shad or so. And they come up and they attack the skirt just like the buzzbait. Except about this one, it has what's called a trailer hook, which I have the little protector on it, so it's kind of hard to see. This trailer hook hangs down from the normal hook, and so if a fish were to miss this hook, he'll come down and get on this hook, and you'll still get the fish. And on to the next one, we have crankbaits. Now these come in many different sizes, shapes, and colors, and you can also get them running in different depths, such as this one. Sorry, this one's a little bit beat up, but it's the only example like this that I have. Has a small spoon looking thing on the front. I like to call it a tongue, because it looks like a little tongue on the fish. But since it's so small, it has less forces trying to push it down, so this one will run a little bit shallower than others. Now this one has a much larger spoon on it, and it creates a wake in the water that forces it down, and it also causes it to wiggle through the water, such as this. And when it runs deeper, a lot of times it's for different fish, but you can also catch bass, muskie, and walleye, and other sorts of fish on here. Now this one is actually my personal favorite. This is a classic crankbait, and because of the shape that it has, and it's about the right depth. I like it. It runs about 2 to 4 feet, depending on the line I'm using and how fast the retrieve is. But personally, this is one of my favorites. It's a chartreuse color with a blue on top, and I've caught a lot of fish on this bait, so it's my personal recommendation. And last but not least, I have Topwaters. Now this is good for poles like cast really easily. This does not work too well on bait casters because it causes backlashes. But I use this on a spin casting reel or a spinning reel just because I can get this a little bit farther. And what this does is you cast it out, you let it sit on top of the water, and you'll twitch your line, and this thing will scoot forward, and sometimes it'll knock to the side, and it'll make a little bubble at the mouth of it and make a little popping sound, and that's why it's called a popper. And the skirt on here, it gives a fish a target just like the other baits, but the hook on this one doesn't have a trailer, so it only has this one hook on it, so I tend to miss some fish on here. But out of topwater baits, this is probably the bait that I catch most of them on. And the next one is what's called a spook, and I'm guessing this one's supposed to look like a rainbow trout. And I just jig this on top, similar to the popper, except it's just a little bit faster speed. But I never reel it in. I just twitch my line and reel in my slack as I twitch it, and it'll cause it to zigzag. It'll shoot one way like that and then the other way, and it's a really slow retrieve. If you cast it out 20 yards, it could take a couple minutes to bring in. So that's one thing I like about this bait. And it's also good for other fish too besides bass, but personally I like to use it for bass. But anyways, that's the last of the baits, and I hope you guys find this video helpful.